What impact does a conflict on the other side have on the world? It's felt at the dinner table in the case of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yes, the conflict will most likely dominate dinner talk, but it will also raise the cost of the food on the table. Hey guys, welcome back to another interesting episode of Value Add Guy. Today we'll be discussing the global food crisis. So, shall we start? Before we start, don't forget to thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on the post notifications to not miss out on any future updates. Due to the conflict in Ukraine, sanctions, import bans, infrastructure destruction, a refugee crisis, and supply chain disruptions are driving up global food costs and threatening shortages. Importantly, higher prices and possibly lower supplies could result in increased food insecurity in the United States and around the world. President Vladimir Putin said that Russia must monitor its food exports to hostile countries since Western sanctions have exacerbated a worldwide food crisis and pushed up energy prices. The West's sanctions in response to Putin's February 24 invasion of Ukraine have pushed Russia into its biggest economic crisis since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, though Moscow claims the sanctions' global impact could be much greater. Higher energy prices combined with a scarcity of fertilizers will push the West to print money to buy up supplies, causing food shortages in poorer countries, the Kremlin chief said. Egypt's food security dilemma has become an existential threat to its economy after the commencement of the Russia-Ukraine war on February 24, 2022. Egypt's food security is precarious since the agricultural sector is unable to produce enough cereal grains, particularly wheat and oilseeds, to meet even half of the country's demand. To secure a sufficient and cheap supply of bread and vegetable oil for its 105 million citizens, Cairo relies on massive amounts of heavily subsidized imports. Egypt has become the world's largest importer of wheat and one of the top 10 importers of sunflower oil as a result of securing those supplies. Cairo was already experiencing food inflation levels not seen since the Arab Spring political turmoil a decade prior, which deposed previous President Hosni Mubarak's regime. President Abdel Fattah al-Government Sisi is now also vulnerable to increasing food expenses that are reaching budget-breaking levels after working tirelessly for 8 years to bring Egypt's economy back on track. The Russia-Ukraine conflict pushed prices to unsustainable levels in Egypt, raising wheat prices by 44% and sunflower oil prices by 32% almost overnight. Even more troubling, the conflict threatens Egypt's physical supply, as 85% of its wheat and 73% of its sunflower oil come from Russia and Ukraine. Egypt already needs to find alternate supplies because activity at Ukraine's ports has come to a halt. A further escalation that halts all Black Sea shipments might force Russian supplies of the market, perhaps causing a catastrophe. Egypt can handle the challenge with around 4 months' worth of wheat stocks, but it will need to move quickly and decisively, which will be aided by the prompt assistance of its American and European friends. Russia's invasion of Ukraine may result in less bread on the table in Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, and other Arab countries, where millions already struggle to make ends meet. The region relies significantly on wheat from the two countries, and any shortages of the main grain might cause turmoil. The conflict in Ukraine has the potential to cause global food shortages. Experts fear that a dark period of scarcer, more expensive food will arrive this year as a result of far less Ukrainian and Russian grain and fertilizer entering global markets. Together, Ukraine and Russia produce approximately 30% of the world's traded wheat and 12% of its calories. Without them, rising food prices and shortages could spark a wave of unrest unprecedented since the Arab Spring of 2012. The war has effectively halted both countries' grain exports, and because of the two countries, together with Russia's sanctioned ally Belarus, contribute large amounts of fertilizer. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine could have an impact on every farmer on the planet this year and for the foreseeable future. The agricultural time bomb is ticking louder as the war drags on and planting season approaches in just a week. According to Arif Hussain, chief economist of the UN World Food Programme, Russia and Ukraine supply more than half of the world's wheat. Things will deteriorate further if this battle is not resolved in the next weeks. As a result, Ukraine will be unable to sow corn. Winter wheat in the ground will not be fertilized, resulting in a significantly lower harvest. That is a serious threat. They are a 40 million strong country that feeds a population of 400 million. That is the globalized world's reality. We are all on the same team. Ukraine, long known as Europe's breadbasket, has transformed into an agricultural powerhouse for much of the developing world in the last decade. Since 2012, Ukraine's exports have more than doubled thanks to better seeds, new equipment, and better agronomy, as well as major investments in grain handling infrastructure and oilseed crush factories at Black Sea ports by companies like Cargill, Bunge, and Glencore. now ranks among the top 5 exporters of a number of essential grains and oilseeds, accounting for 10% of global wheat exports and over half of global sunflower oil exports. Russia is blockading ports and destroying port cities as the war develops. In the first week of the assault, a Russian missile destroyed a Cargill chartered ship. Banking restrictions and expensive wartime insurance rates on grain shipments stymie Russian exports. Wheat, corn, and soy prices have already surpassed levels seen during the last global food price crisis in 2012 and 2008, with wheat up 60% since the beginning of February. The previous crisis prompted international food riots, overthrew governments of Madagascar and Haiti, and sparked Arab Spring protests in the Middle East. Today's world is even more turbulent. We didn't have COVID in 2008. There was no war in Yemen, Syria, Ethiopia, or northeast Nigeria. Governments are trapped out as a result of COVID. Debt levels in many poor nations are at their highest levels ever. Inflation is at an all-time high. Food prices were at 10-year highs, and fuel prices were at 7-year highs even before Ukraine was invaded. People are being pressed from both sides when job losses and income losses are combined with increasing prices. This problem could not have arrived at a more inconvenient time. This year, the World Food Programme WFP plans to feed a record 140 million people, including more than 3 million displaced Ukrainians and 44 million others in 28 countries on the verge of starvation. Many of these countries rely on Ukrainian grain supplies. Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, Ethiopia, and over a dozen of other Middle Eastern and African countries are among them. To make matters worse, after the invasion, WFP expenses increased by $71 million every month, resulting in a $10 billion shortage for the coming year. It has caused them to start restricting food supply to the most vulnerable. Because of the fighting and sanctions, 13.5 million tons of wheat and 16 million tons of corn from last year's harvest in Ukraine and Russia are currently stranded. Higher exports from Australia and India, both of which had good wheat yields last year, could help make up some of the loss. Economists are concerned about the destiny of this year's crop in Ukraine. We are potentially losing 60 million tons of grain from Ukraine's crop last year, not just 6 million tons. Losing the next harvest will be a severe shortfall that no one can compensate for, and he claims that's not even the most serious issue. Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus also export large amounts of nitrogen and potassium fertilizers to other countries. The interruption of the fertilizer trade is the greatest threat to food chain. Wheat will have an influence on several countries. The fertilizer issue has the potential to affect every farmer in the world, resulting in a drop in the output of all foods, not only wheat. Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the fertilizer business was already in disarray. Potash shipments from Belarus were banned after the government of Belarus forced a Ryanair flight to land last year and arrested a descendant on board. COVID-19 wreaked havoc on global supply networks and shipping. Last year, Hurricane Ada devastated 2 huge fertilizer factories on the Gulf Coast of the United States, which have struggled to reopen, while a plant in North Carolina were destroyed by fire. After the price of natural gas, a key ingredient, surged last year, many European manufacturers cut back on nitrogen fertilizer manufacturing. Fertilizer imports from the Black Sea region are primarily reliant on European, South American, and African countries. To make matters worse, global stockpiles of wheat, corn, and soybeans are at their lowest levels in more than a decade, according to Laboratory, while export curbs that wreaked havoc on markets in 2008 are reappearing. Russia halted fertilizer exports last autumn, and China, another major exporter, followed suit. China went on a big grain and soy buying binge in 2021 to restore its own inventories and the pork industry, which had lost an estimated 100 million pigs due to an outbreak of African swine flu. China announced earlier this year that it was expecting its worst wheat crop in history, and an independent scientists have confirmed its dire state. According to Arnaud Petit, executive director of the International Grains Council, which monitors grain trade throughout the world, China is projected to import more grains this year simply to fulfill demand. The grain market is more constrained than it was in 2008 or 2013. We do not expect any stock rebuilding in the next 5 years due to increasing demand from growing populations and changing diets. As a result, any climate change or conflict will have an effect. All of this emphasizes the importance of a good crop in the rest of the world. Catastrophic drought in Kazakhstan, Europe, or Argentina is something we can't afford right now. We don't want to present a dismal picture, but markets will explode. We should be fine if the planet is generous to us this year. However, a bad stock right now might push us into a major food crisis. It will be disastrous if a climatic shock strikes one of the world's bread baskets this year. It will pale in comparison to 2008 and 2012. On a global scale, we are in for some big production shocks. Many farmers in the United States are already feeling the strain. Justin Bruch worked as a corporate farmer in Ukraine for 7 years, managing up to 60,000 hectares, which is 148,000 acres, before returning home in 2014 after Russia invaded Crimea and the Donbass areas. He now runs an agricultural venture capital firm in Omaha, Nebraska, in addition to assisting his brother on the family farm near Emmetsburg, Iowa. According to Bruch, the price of nitrogen fertilizer has more than doubled. Friends in the farming industry in Brazil are concerned that they will not be able to obtain the fertilizer they require. Fearing that he would run out of diesel, one of his Iowa buddies bought a tanker truck and loaded it with all of his fuel for the year. Bruch can't seem to find a center pivot wheel, which is a crucial spare part during irrigation season. More concerning, he claims, soil moisture prior to planting is at its lowest level in a long time. Bruch's main concern, though, is for his buddies who are still farming in Ukraine. Days before the invasion, he tried to persuade his former ergonomist Vladimir Putin to come to America, but the Ukrainians refused. Putin currently runs Bruch's former operation near Lviv and is ready to plant the farm after evacuating family members from the war zone. Jonathan Clibborn, an Irish immigrant, is in a better situation than him. Clibborn, an Irish immigrant, is doing what practically every other Ukrainian farmer is doing these days, checking on family in the war zone, sheltering families fleeing the bombardment, and battling to keep his farm solvent. Putin writes that they have enough materials to seed the land in spring and that they should be able to harvest their crops as long as the conflict does not reach them. He's less hopeful, though, about the farmers in the east. In my judgment, none of the ground that is under military operations will be planted, Putin writes, and given the current weather conditions and the fact that the majority of the region is in the south and southeast, it will be too late to plant anytime soon. All of this will reduce total potential grain export capacity, and even if we produce slightly less than usual, how will it be shipped? Seaport infrastructure is deteriorating, and railway capacity is insufficient for large amounts of grain. Nonetheless, Putin, a proud Ukrainian who grew up near Kyiv, is doing everything he can to help his country grow food, just as Clibborn is doing for his chosen motherland. The situation echoes the Holodomor, and a man-made famine staged by Joseph Stalin in the early 1930s to quell Ukrainian resistance to farm collectivization. Stalin ordered the Soviet troops to take away Ukrainian peasants' food supplies. Even their pets, 3.9 million individuals, are thought to have died. 1 out of every 10 people on the planet is hungry, and the coronavirus epidemic has exacerbated the situation by disrupting markets and food delivery networks in underdeveloped nations, increasing poverty. What makes this problem much worse is that the effects of climate change have already disrupted critical agricultural markets around the world. After extensive drought and record heat waves in Canada, one of the world's largest grain producers, prices for durum wheat, which is used to create pasta, rose by 90% late last year. Last year, wildfires and extreme weather hit key growing areas in the United States, while drought hit parts of Latin America. Australia is experiencing devastating floods, with the effects on agricultural exports yet to be completely realized. This comes on top of last year's weather issues. Food prices in the United Kingdom have been impacted by Brexit, which has increased costs due to the additional bureaucracy required in shipping. People in some of the world's most vulnerable places were already experiencing severe food shortages as a result of weather conditions that have been proven to be deteriorating as a result of the climate catastrophe. Drought is already ravaging the Horn of Africa, with hunger looming. 3 failed wet seasons in a row have destroyed crops and resulted in very high livestock deaths. Water and pasture shortages are pushing families to leave their houses, resulting in greater community tension. Forecasts indicate that the below average rainfall will deteriorate in the following months, exacerbating already given grave conditions. The war is undoubtedly posing a great threat in the world, and not just in terms of grain trade, but also that fertilizers across the world may be in scarce, resulting in the less production of all the foods. What are your views on looming food shortages? Do let us know in the comment section below. Subscribe for more content just like this one and share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to smash that like button and also press the bell icon to get notified about our new videos. Until then.